Welcome to this module on using identity and security in Azure. In this module, we're going to talk about identity, or identifying your users, keeping track of those logins or authentication credentials. We're also going to look at protecting secrets, whether that's in documents that you have, or say encryption keys, or those types of secrets that you need to manage and work with in your applications. And we'll talk about securing your applications, some of the different options you have for how users log in, and how you connect those applications up to directory services or identities. Now, it probably won't be a big surprise if you've done any work around Microsoft in the past that Active Directory is a large part of the identity story in Azure. We have Azure Active Directory as a very specific implementation for the cloud. It provides your core directory services, allowing you to manage all of your users and their identity information out there. It also supports more advanced authentication technologies like multi-factor authentication, allowing you to require that when your users authenticate, in addition to their username and password, they may need to prove that they have access to a particular hardware device. A common example is having your phone and using an authentication app or text messaging with a code as an additional layer of security. Now, one of the great things about Azure Active Directory is that it's able to synchronize with your directory. So if you already have Active Directory in your data centers and you're using that to log people in, you have the ability to synchronize those users out to an Azure Active Directory and allow them to log into your Azure-based resources. A lot of companies do this today with Office 365, where they synchronize their users between the cloud and their own data centers. With Active Directory, we of course have those core services as I mentioned, but we also have Azure AD Domain Services, or Azure Active Directory Domain Services. When you have servers and computers in your Active Directory domain, you usually join them to a domain. And that's what Domain Services provides, that ability for computers to link up with an Active Directory and be part of that directory. With Azure AD Domain Services, your virtual machines that you're running can be added into that domain. But this is the cloud, so we don't have to go out and provision virtual machines and set up an Active Directory node and install all of the roles on there. You can provision Azure AD Domain Services to do that for you. Additionally, we have Azure AD B2C, or business to consumer. And this is an identity store for your applications or your endpoints that you're going to be exposing out to customers or partners outside of your directory, and allows you to do things like use a username and password for login, but gives you the backbone of Active Directory to contain all that information. Or you can use other providers such as social providers or Microsoft accounts to allow people to authenticate into your applications. So you can use this to get the broad reach of being able to allow customers to use a variety of different login services or identity services, but still take advantage of the time-tested directory services in Active Directory. A big part of Azure, of course, is going to be building and deploying your applications, and they're going to use this identity information. One of the services that's available is something called a managed identity. And this allows you to run your application and have it access Azure resources with a particular identity. You can think of this as similar to, say, an application pool identity that you might set up in IaaS, or a service account that you might use when you run a Windows service in your own data center. And this is going to go a long way toward making it easier to secure secrets and other information and allow your application access to it in a controlled way. We also have the ability in your Active Directory, as part of your Azure subscription, to register applications. When you create an application and you want to allow your users to log into it, you register it into the Active Directory, providing callback URIs and other critical information that helps ensure that only the applications that you've set up and approved are using your directory to authenticate those users. And then we have enterprise applications, which serve a similar purpose, but these may be applications that you haven't written. So let's say you've purchased some third-party software as a service application, but your users are going to log in with their Active Directory credentials. These too will appear in your subscription under your directory, where you'll have some ability to manage those applications and understand, again, what applications are authenticating against your directory. In addition to identifying and authenticating users, you want to protect the data in your organization. Information protection is one of those services that allows you to connect up to, say, your Office 365 and Office tools to protect your documents, your emails, other data that you're creating. It provides a rich set of tools for you to classify the data and label it as it's being created, along with some defaults, and then enforces the protection of that data across the tools, and even when it leaves your systems and goes to other platforms or other areas. And the ability to access that information is supported cross-platform and on mobile devices as well. So this is a great way if you need to protect email content or documents for compliance and regulatory reasons to do that. We also have Key Vault. Now, Key Vault is all about storing those secrets like encryption keys that you need to use to access information, but you don't want to store them in the clear in, say, a config file or your code. And with Key Vault, you can store them securely, and you can allow certain applications or identities to access those values so that at runtime, you can extract them and use them in your code. If you prefer, you can drill into the Key Vault and you can take control of some of the actual keys used to protect the data in the vault. And if you need to go even further, or maybe you're migrating an application from your own data center, and you're using a hardware security module, you have the ability in Azure to request and set up a hardware-based security module in an Azure data center connected directly to your virtual networks. This is an actual physical hardware device that stores your keys and information and is only accessible to your subscription. Not even Microsoft can access that HSM to work with your keys. So a number of different options for protecting data all the way from documents to encryption keys. As you start managing the security of an Azure subscription, and as the subscription gets more complicated, Azure Security Center can help you get a cross-cutting view of the security concerns in your environment. So it allows you to do things like monitor your virtual machines and your applications. It can tell you if your virtual machines are missing critical patches, or if maybe you've got some ports open on the virtual machine setup and its networking that you might want to close. You can look at your web applications and see, do you have particular ports enabled? Do you have SSL enabled like you should? In addition to monitoring these things in Azure, you can expand this to monitor VMs from your own data center. So you can install an agent there, have the Azure Security Center communicate with that agent, and validate that those VMs also meet your requirements, are patched, and secured. All this information can be surfaced up through the Azure Monitor that we talked about in the management section, so that you can get that visualization of the security aspect of your environment alongside the other information that you're monitoring for. So a big part of the Security Center is, of course, telling you that there are things you can fix and providing you advice. How can you make this more secure? Obviously, we want to be secure by default, but through the process of creating and building your solution, it's possible that you've opened yourself up to some risk, and the Security Center can help you identify that and figure out ways to mitigate it. And you can also get alerts when things start happening in your environment that are a security concern. There are some additional security services as well that have that familiar feel, but take advantage of the cloud. For example, Azure Sentinel. This is all about an SIEM solution to monitoring all of your resources, but it takes advantage of the cloud, things like machine learning, AI, and the unlimited compute power out there to really give you that analysis and find those threats. We have the familiar Defender brand, where Azure Defender is all about protecting your virtual machines, your platform as a service instances from additional threats. Again, taking advantage of the fact that you're running out in the cloud and you have that cloud intelligence and scale to be able to find those threats and alert you. And across your Azure resources, you can take advantage of all that identity that we talked about previously by using role-based access control. So being able to identify not only specific people and users and what they can access and what permissions they have, but also using things like system identities or managed identities that are accounts used to host your services, which then can be assigned role-based access to your different resources, helping you to better secure all of the aspects of your Azure subscription. Let's take a look at a couple of examples of how we might use some of this identity and security. One is securing those application secrets. We think about that web application. Maybe you're going to call an API. But in order to do that, you need a particular key that you have to include in the header. So we want to get that key from Key Vault. We want to store it into Key Vault, probably as part of our deployment process with our resource manager and other deployment tools. And at runtime, our web application will retrieve that key and use it to access the API. Now you may be thinking to yourself, yeah, but in order to access that key, shouldn't I have some sort of credentials or secret? Yes, you should. And that's where that managed identity comes into play. Your web application can be set up to run with that managed identity, and that identity can be given access to read the key from the Key Vault. So this is how these pieces fit together to help us provide a secure store and limited access to those keys at runtime. Another example might be web application identity, or how are you going to authenticate your users for your web application? You have an app service deployed out into Azure, and of course you have Azure Active Directory as part of your Azure subscription, but you want to authenticate users from your enterprise. So you could set up the directory sync to make sure your internal Active Directory is synchronized to your Azure Active Directory, and all those users are represented. And then those users will be able to log into your web application using their enterprise credentials. There are also facilities for setting up single sign-on so that they won't have to go through a login process if they're already logged into a machine with those credentials. Alternately, you may want to set up an Azure B2C directory because you're going to build your website and your focus is on external partners or external users. And you want to manage them and give them a process to sign up, log in, and sign out. You can collect profile information from them at the time they create those accounts. And then those external users will be able to access your web application as well. You could mix these together or do either or, depending on your requirements. So we've looked at a couple of different things for security and identity. One of the things I want you to take away is we have that same powerful Active Directory system that you've probably been using for years in your enterprise, but it's now built out at cloud scale with all the reliability and features that you need for cloud applications. We've got advanced solutions for protecting data and identity information, as well as those keys and secrets that you want to use in your secure applications. And we've got application protections. We have things in place with the directory where you register your applications, you configure them and set them up to ensure that your applications or applications that you've subscribed to are correctly set up to use your directory, but other applications are not. Now that you've got a sense of the identity and security features in Azure, we'll move on to wrapping up with other services and the course summary.